Gnosticism is inherently an unhelpful term. It has no defined definition. That was written incredibly poorly. It has no specific definition, its study is flawed, and its very invention was malevolent. There were no such group called the Gnostics, but there were plenty of groups given the umbrella term Gnostics by outsiders to refer to them negatively. Karen King, in her book What is Gnosticism, put it humorously, quote, "Despite the relative ease with which Webster's dictionary tackles the problem, defining the term Gnosticism is one of the greatest challenges in Gnostic studies." It's pretty bad when your entire study is based on trying to define what that study is. I should note that while King has some controversy, i.e. retired for publishing research on what was found out to be a forged document, her book on Gnosticism is quite good. This kind of thing may surprise you if you know one of the Gnostic churches that exist today, but these churches do not derive from some long-standing unified Gnostic history, but are more along the lines of neo-Gnostic movements. This makes things even more confusing. The term originates in the 17th century to describe one ancient group that would later be considered archetypal Gnostics, the Valentinians. The majority of their theology, rituals, and so on are not relevant for this video. Just know that it was all very fascinating, and all other Gnostic groups had their own unique ideas, and I'll be listing some resources in the description if you want to learn about them. The important bits I will mainly cover as they come, but first some Gnostic stereotypes and helpful definitions. Gnosticism is based from the Greek word gnosis, spelled with a G, meaning knowledge. That's it, just knowledge. Within a religious context, it is often interpreted as a secret or spiritual knowledge, one that could save your soul, for example. As Gnostics prioritized knowledge rather than faith, they were labeled as the learned ones by detractors, namely Catholics, which is where the term Gnostics come from, meaning the learned ones as in ones who prioritize knowledge, or gnosis, meaning Gnostics. Remember, this is simply a common stereotype of so-called Gnostic groups. This is not always the case depending on the individual sect. A common stereotype within Gnosticism is the idea of the demiurge, or at least that the Old Testament God is not the supreme God, merely a deity, divine being, something that made the earth, which was bad. The monad, or the one, or any of the other names of the true God could save us from this gross physical world, and Jesus came down from the good God to teach us that through knowledge we can escape the physical realm and live forever. Gnostics believe that other Christian sects misinterpreted Jesus' teachings, which they in turn said the Gnostics misinterpreted Jesus. But again, stereotypically speaking, my cat is screeching in the other room. The first instance of modern anti-Gnosticism that I could find was by the scholar Erik Voegelin, a German political scientist and philosopher. The main book he is known for is The New Science of Politics, which is essentially a furious screed against philosophers like Nietzsche, Marx, and Hegel, citing them as totalitarians trying to shut down any ideas that aren't like theirs. He frequently compares the supposed authoritarian leanings to Gnosticism, referring to them as Gnostics and using gnosis to describe things they believe in. He provides no definition of either term in this book. For that you have to read his book Science, Politics, and Gnosticism. Erik Voegelin never defines Gnosticism in clear terms, and he only ever defines gnosis as knowledge. That's helpful. He illustrates the ancient Gnostics believed in the physical world as bad, and through knowledge they could free their soul to a new, better world. Voegelin states that the assumption of the world being bad made sense prior to the Christianization of Rome, but then everything got better after Christianization of Rome renewed the world. Yeah, the world definitely got better, and nothing bad ever happened after Constantine. Basically, he understands that Gnosticism's ideas are not literal, but more metaphorical, in the sense that a new and better world can mean anything, and that knowledge is what gets you there, not faith. He states that the ancient Gnostics required an alien god, since they did not believe the demiurge was a good god, which would fix everything. And that modern Gnostics, like Marx and Nietzsche and so on, believe that leaving behind private property and the belief in God would lead to a fully human existence? Here's an actual quote from him. Through the assumption of nature, which transforms man into Superman. If you've ever studied philosophy or political science, you may recognize some of the terms used here. He fundamentally argues against Nietzschean nihilism as well as the entire school of positivism. Essentially, the idea that truth can be discovered by being smart and observing things rather than believing in divine truths. I cannot say positivism is his worst nightmare. Voegelin frequently shows disdain for the idea that the world runs on scientific laws that are not dictated by a god. After talking about some of Plato's ideas, he says, "Actual knowledge is reserved to God. Finite man can only be the lover of knowledge, not himself the one who knows." Basically meaning that only God knows truth and humans can only ever love finding the truth but never actually getting to it. If we now place Hegel's idea of philosophizing alongside Plato's, we shall have to conclude that while there is indeed a progress in clarity and precision of knowledge and the order of being, the leap over bounds of the finite into the perfection of actual knowledge is impossible. If a thinker attempts it, he is not advancing philosophy, but abandoning it to become a Gnostic. Hegel conceals the leap by translating Philosophia and Gnosis into German so that he can shift from one to the other by playing on the word knowledge. The point is worth noting because the German Gnostics especially like to play with language and hide their non-thought and wordplay. I don't think Hegel had to translate gnosis into knowledge for some trickery. He did it because he's fucking German. If you expected what I'm about to say, consider yourself blessed with gnosis, because Erik Voegelin is incredibly theist. The idea that a god has to exist. From what I could tell, he was considered a perennial philosopher, meaning he most likely believed religion, possibly not any specific one, but just in general, religions had some truth in the sense that the universe had to have been created by a god, and that there are divine truths and so on and so forth, and my phone is going to go off the entire recording session. He argues from a standpoint that Enlightenment-era science is essentially incompatible with God and also real life, and for whatever reason he considers science Gnostic. I bet it probably has to do with the theoretical idea that Gnosticism believes in escaping our current world to get to a new one, i.e. becoming the Ubermensch and communism, I guess. It's one thing to be religious. It's one thing to be anti-science, but it is rather extreme to call those you don't like, from Nietzsche to Marx, Gnostics. Gnosticism, as both a categorical term and a set of ideas, has hardly anything to do with what he's talking about. It's merely used as a tool to describe heretical ideas, things he just doesn't like. Consider this quote. "Philosophy springs from the love of being. It is a man's loving endeavor to perceive the order of being and to attune himself to it. Gnosis desires dominion over being." Dominion over being? I don't know what Gnosticism has to do with dominion, unless you count being anti-Catholic as being totalitarian, which would certainly explain this quote. Here is quite literally the introduction to the foreword to the American edition. "The more we come to know about the gnosis of antiquity, the more it becomes certain the modern movements of thought, such as progressivism, positivism, Hegelianism, and Marxism are variants of Gnosticism." In summary, Gnosticism, according to Erik Voegelin, is whatever he considers evil and anti-religious. So who's next? I'm going to be moving around a lot because fuck you, that's why. One famous modern anti-Gnostic is Bishop Robert Barron. Clever. The so-called Bishop of the Internet due to his fame on YouTube as well as appearing on multiple television news networks. In an interview with World on Fire, which I believe is a Catholic podcast, he attempted to define Gnosticism as a sect that believed they had unique knowledge and therefore they were right about everything because they knew the secret.
So the Gnostics claimed they had a sort of private knowledge, a specialized knowledge of the way things really are.
That's not really how Gnosticism works, but this isn't surprising. He regurgitates the idea of Gnosticism as a monolithic idea of saving souls with gnosis, demiurge, etc., using blanket stereotypes without referring to specific Gnostic ideas. I'm not surprised, I'm just disappointed. Funnily enough, he likens Gnosticism to Plato's cave story.
The perceptive person will see overtones of Platonism. There's something of Plato's anthropology of imprisonment, that the soul is, as it were, imprisoned in the body.
A comparison I'm sure Erik Voegelin would be furious with, in the sense that finding knowledge will help you escape from the cave. So basically he considers Gnosticism to be a Neo-Platonist movement, which is ironic considering Erik Voegelin described Gnosticism as an anti-Platonic movement. Ironically, Bishop Robert Barron, I gotta think of a way to call this guy, Rob, describes the appeal of Gnosticism just like an atheist would describe the appeal of Christianity. Belonging to a group, getting saved, good versus evil dualism, etc.
We've always loved the prospect of being part of a little group that kind of gets it, that understands what's really going on. And most people, they don't get it. Most people are lost in illusion, or they're lost in ignorance. But there's a little group of us that we have the secret knowledge.
He cites Irenaeus' text against Marcionite theology, which is one of the many groups under the Gnostic umbrella, which is also where a lot of stereotypes come from, along with Valentinians. Understandably, both Irenaeus and Rob take a basic Catholic approach to ancient Gnostic ideas. Word of God, good. Gnostics don't get it right. Jesus needs the Old Testament like the Gnostics are arguing against. Pope is good, so on and so forth. The problem with looking at anti-Gnostics is the only sources Catholics use are the people like Irenaeus, Catholics who hated Gnostics. Their sources are so incredibly biased and fractured by an inability to look at the actual Gnostic sources that they're unable to properly debate them. So during the interview they bring up the Da Vinci Code as well as movies in general nowadays, bring sort of resurging Gnosticism, since it appears in the Da Vinci Code as a victim of conspiracy. But of course it depicts all Gnostics as believing Jesus was a physical human, not the Son of God, which was more of a Islamic or Judaic belief, not a Gnostic one as far as I'm aware. And also, this is ignoring the fact that the neo-Gnostic Church of Gnosticism movements have been coming around since about, 100, 200 years? So, the Da Vinci Code did not start this. Rob also ties the Star Wars films into it due to its dualistic good versus evilisms.
Compare Tolkien to Star Wars. It would be very illuminating, actually. Both involving, struggle and against evil and all this. But the Star Wars telling is a Gnostic telling. And I'll give you the genealogy. Star Wars, produced by George Lucas, who was a disciple of Joseph Campbell, who was a disciple of Carl Jung. And Carl Jung, in his psychologizing, early 20th century, is deeply influenced by the Gnostic approach.
By bringing up how George Lucas was, in one way or another, influenced by Carl Jung, who was influenced by Gnosticism, which means I have to talk about Carl Jung and Gnosticism. Jung was influenced by Gnostic ideas, but ultimately did not consider himself one. Well, that was easy. To say that his influence on Gnosticism meant that he was a Gnostic or that he spread Gnostic influences is downright incorrect.
Tolkien, on the contrary, is influenced by his Catholic faith, which goes right back through people like Irenaeus to Polycarp to John. That's his genealogy, and it's a whole different game.
This isn't to say that Gnosticism has no influence in the modern day. It has definitely had its researchers since it was purged by the Catholic Church. There are several neo-Gnostic churches, as I've mentioned, and plenty of fiction authors and scholars and such use Gnostic stereotypes in their writing, as well as just genuine understanding of what the actual belief systems were like. Even modern philosophers like Jung and Erik Davis have both used Gnostic stereotypes or genuine Gnostic understandings of individual sex in their writings. This does not mean that Gnosticism endured and still corrupts to this day. Do you think people walk out of Star Wars thinking, oh, well, I guess the Empire represented the demiurge? Like, no, of course not. They think it's the devil. Regardless of actual influence or not, Gnosticism as a belief structure and corrupting force died with all the people murdered by the Pope. Gnosticism is an imaginary threat invented to explain away... Wait, being trans?
In the Gnostic view, the body is fallen, right? And the spirit's what's all about, what's going on inside of me. And the spirit has this prerogative to shape matter. Matter is just this sort of fallen, infinitely malleable thing that spirit has total control over. Well, we see it, of course, as you say, broadly in the culture of self-invention, make it more specific in the gender ideologies to say, I can remake my own body. I'm not happy with the body I've been given, well, I'll change it. That's a basically Gnostic impulse.
Of course. Rob brings up being transgender is Gnostic. He says it because, like, changing yourself is inherently Gnostic. What, like, knowledge or gnosis of estrogen is going to make you trans? What? Okay, if you're going to personally bring me into this, if you think God made you perfect, why do you wear glasses? What, so you can see better? But God made your eyesight like that on purpose, right? So wearing glasses is denying how God made you perfect the way you are. Do you not accept the body God gave you? Well, you must be wearing glasses because you're a Gnostic. Trans people are not rejecting God by aligning their bodies with their gender. To say this ignores Christian trans people all over the world. It's difficult to put into words why exactly this argument is unintellectual and uninformed, but I really shouldn't have to explain it. Everything this bishop says is a half-truth, uneducated opinion on society as he understands it. After reading thousand-year-old debates without reading the arguments of his opponents, this is ultimately the Catholic understanding of Gnosticism. We say they are against God. Do not listen to them because they hate God. That's why so little Gnostic documents survived the past 2,000 years. Eventually, the interviewer brings up how Gnosticism created conspiracy theories.
Another place that we see Gnosticism pop up pretty regularly is in the realm of conspiracy theories. And I'm thinking not just of the wild theories outside the church, you know, aliens, Area 51, whatever the conspiracy theory of the day is, but also inside the church. We're seeing a rampant increase in conspiracy theories about who's manipulating what and taking control of the church. They all bear the marks of this Gnostic idea that there's a small group of enlightened adepts that really know the truth of what's going on and everyone else has been deceived. Do you trace conspiracy theories right back to Gnosticism?
It's part of the appeal of it.
Good one. Rob uses this as a means to incorrectly cite Marx's base superstructure idea to call it Gnostic.
You know, another place to see that, if you want, is in someone like Marx, who's so influential on contemporary thinking. Marx, who has the kind of substructure, superstructure view of things. The superstructure, so what appears out there publicly is, you know, the military, politics, religion, art, culture, all of that. But what's really going on, we adepts of the Marxist system know what's really going on is economic, you know, plays of power and so on.
The base does not mean what's really going on. The base is productive relationships. How is that conspiratorial? The idea of secret knowledge being the birth of conspiracy is baseless. Conspiracy theories are much older than Gnosticism. This fucking guy made a video called The Threat of Totalitarianism, where he suggests that speech is being censored because it's true, which in his opinion, of course, is Catholicism. Catholicism is true. Censorship is censoring what's true, therefore Catholicism, there's a conspiracy against Catholicism. Is he a Gnostic for saying this? No, he simply wields Gnosticism as a blunt object to paint something as bad. Are you seeing a pattern? Once again, it comes down to everything I don't like is Gnostic. The key question I want to walk away from this is, however, what happened between the origin of Gnosticism and today? He claims it to be an enduring heresy, enduring against What? He never answers. This is where the Catholic suppression of Gnosticism was left out of his talk, presumably because I'm sure if he talked about how the Pope Innocent III, currently enshrined in the US Congress, genocided French Gnostic Cathars, I don't think he would get much sympathy. Well, he probably would with that crowd. Gnosticism as heresy is the exact framing people like Rob want you to see. When you think Gnostic, he wants you to think of heresy. Evil. Star Wars. In summary, Gnosticism, according to Catholics, is whatever they consider evil. This brings me to the modern conspiracy theories on Gnosticism. Much like any other empty word to represent malevolence in the world, Gnosticism has been targeted by those who seek to find an enemy. There are, of course, plenty of memes decrying Gnosticism and its influence, as well as the Voegelin-esque rant videos on how philosophers influenced by Gnosticism corrupt Gnosis into the world. But these kinds of things are harder to find than you may think. Now trust me, I did a lot of digging, and I found a shit ton of images, but I had to dig for them. That's what's important. You can find QAnon fucking anywhere. This kind of conspiracy theory is not mainstream. Even though that's the case, I'm still drawn to learn about why it exists. What makes people use Gnosticism as a villain instead of Jews like everyone else does? I could have simply made a video laughing at these anti-Gnostic memes and got me more views than this video will, but I'm interested in the motivation for their hate and label. As far as I can tell, it's due to the hidden element of Gnosticism. Even nowadays, the word Gnosticism is pretty rare. If you hear it, you either already know what it is and have devoted a lot of time to trying to understand what it means, or you just discovered the esoteric knowledge of something that you can learn about for the first time or hate. This is just speculation, however. In terms of concrete why, nothing makes sense. The detractors of Gnosticism make fun of and discredit ideas nobody believes. Then again, conspiracy theories never needed an element of truth. Remember back to the 1980s satanic panic? There were no genuine Satanists causing trouble, and yet America got in a heated decade of debate. Perhaps that's the answer. A simple need for a scapegoat so anyone can be on your side against them. It's taking forever to set up just for a one-off joke. Shit.